we don't care who gets hurt. Money's only ethic is to reproduce itself.
Yeah.
And so we've invented an entire modern, it's interesting because you write so much about Stoicism, which is a ethical framework for being a human being. I mean, corporate America has destroyed, or corporate world has destroyed people's more. I needed to get tickets once for a World Series game in the bleachers when it was at Wrigley Field.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to ask Major League Baseball or the Cubs for tickets because it felt super unethical.
Okay.
Because I'm writing about the Cubs.
Yeah.
And so I went on StubHub and bought them.
Yeah.
And we ran into a problem with the expense accounts because there was some person at ESPN, one of the endless vice presidents who said, our policy is you have to go through my office, which goes through Major League Baseball. And I'm like, but that's unethical. And he's like, well, it's not unethical because it's company policy. Right. And so that's what, that happens over and over and over.
Yeah,
company policy, which only exists to maximize shareholder value, is the new ethical code.
Yeah.
And it excuses everyone doing shitty things to other people.
Yeah.
And so you talk about cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
That's it. All of this is, that whole book, when you start reading it, is people who wanted 10% instead of 6%.
Yeah.
And all of this suffering. And, can I say this real quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Let me find this. So this blows my mind. Because, the Mississippi Delta cotton boom was really 20 years. We did all of this for 20 years.
Yeah, and then the consequences and the legacy of those decisions last for 100 plus years.
The Great Mississippi Delta cotton boom lasted 20 years. The suffering and killing and decay that would follow for the next century were the price of 3 great years and a dozen good ones. Those 2 decades also marked the peak of the lost cause Confederate mythology. Consider when all these Confederate statues went up around the state. Consider the history of cotton in the Delta. The land clearing finished around 1900. The price of cotton collapsed for good in 1923. And what happened in between? Port Gibson and Aberdeen raised statues in 1900. Macon in 1901. Fayette in 1904. Carrollton and Beulah and Okolona in 1905. Tupelo and Ole Miss in 1906. Brandon and Oxford and West Point in 1907. Cleveland and Lexington and Raymond and Duck Hill in 1908. Greenville and Winona in 1909. Hattiesburg twice and Grenada in 1910. Gulfport and Kosciuszko and Quitman and Ripley and Brooksville and Heidelberg in 1911. Columbus and Laurel and Meridian and Philadelphia and Vaden in 1912. Greenwood and Sumner in 1913, Greenwood again in 1915, Hazelhurst in 1917, Louisville in 1921. Many of these were placed quite intentionally on the lawn of the local courthouses, sending a message about the law and whom it was designed to protect. Most of the monuments around the state were built during the brief but emotionally powerful cotton boom. Not a single courthouse statue in the state of Mississippi was erected after 1923. The lost cause was always about cotton and money.
Let the record show I
underline
marked that page.
You did. I saw that. That was very pleasing.
No, I think it's fascinating.
But that's what we're talking about.
Yeah. No, I have a book in there I want to give you about the cattle boom.
Yeah.
The exact same economics. It's actually internationally financed. Most Theodore Roosevelt's neighbor in the Badlands was a French marquis, who had, he was the 5th, in line. So his dad, not going to inherit. So he has to go make his fortune overseas. He uses, aristocratic money to start a cattle ranch, which kicks off a cattle boom from the South to get the cattle up. It's fascinating.
Well, so the money planning, the store where Emmett Till whistled was famously in Money, Mississippi.
Yeah.
The money planning company was owned by Charles Merrill of Merrill Lynch.
Okay.
It's you start realizing the degree to which Manchester and Liverpool and London and New York, there's a reason that Vanderbilt and Duke
Well, we think of British colonialism as being, but we were a colony, and they continued to colonize America, just not owning the government. It was just more the modern version of colonialism.
It's like they couldn't remove the Native Americans until after George Washington died.
Yeah.
Because George Washington, he was fundamentally British.
Yeah.
And so, like the government of England, he philosophically thought of the tribes as sovereign nations.
Yeah.
And,
Interesting.
And so the movement, like the real founding father of America is probably Andrew Jackson.
Yeah.
And
the vicious part of what America
and
is.
he killed, like, well, I mean,
Yeah.
all the founding fathers were enslavers. So like, let's not.
Yeah.
But like in terms
Jackson
of
was a psychopath.
in terms of modern populist America,
Yes.
and like they had, I think somebody will fact check me on this, but they had to wait until George Washington died.
Yeah.
He died in 1799. And I think the first Indian Removal Act was 1804. Like they couldn't do it until those guys were gone.
Yeah.
But the minute they were gone,
Yeah.
It's interesting. I sort of feel like the real complexity and moral ambiguity and deep discomfort with their own choices of the founding fathers, we should have more of them, not less. And I sort of feel like the purge of Jefferson and Madison and Washington, like we're missing a really golden opportunity to fight the cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
I mean, if anything, this book is it's about the existential American battle between memory and erasure, and like
it's a fascinating psychological thing, right? Because most of the early founders were conflicted about slavery and articulated often privately all the problems with it,
and got less and like people have gotten and got less and less so.
But by 1820s, 1830s, slavery not only goes from this noxious thing we inherited from the British to a positive good, and that's the definition of cognitive dissonance.
In 1850, it really gets and so you think about, and it's all tied to the global cotton markets.
Yeah,
like my favorite, like. The price of cotton, I checked it this morning. It's 67 cents a pound. It's below production. Like the degree to which the speculation in land and cotton markets is driving. When you read narratives written by enslaved people, the way they talk about how aware they were of the Liverpool price of cotton, because how directly related that was to violence.
Yeah.
When the price got too low, the violence went up. But when the price got too high, it went up too.
Because they had too much money and too much time.
And it's just like, our farm manager was telling me one time that he was complaining, and it occurred. I never thought about this in the context of this until he said it. I wrote about it in the book, but talking about how can't control the weather.
Yeah.
Can't control the price of the seed or the chemicals. You can't control the price of the equipment.
Yeah.
And then you don't set your own prices.
Right.
So you're getting squeezed both ways. The only input, the only X in the equation of a farm budget that a farmer has ever had any control over is the price of labor.
Yes.
And like when he said that to me, I was just like,
well, that struck me because I worked at American Apparel, and Dove started in South Carolina knitting, with a knitting place, because they used to make all the clothes in the American South too. When they stopped shipping overseas, there's a big garment industry in the sort of upper South.
It was the mills.
Yeah, and what he was saying, he was like, look, the problem with fashion has always been like that people decided that because of the competition for price at the store was always suppressing prices. The only way you could make money was by charging, was by paying the people who make the clothes less and less and less. So that was all the exploitation in the South, and then that's what sets off the sweatshop boom all over the U.S. And he was like, if I can just be a better brander and make a product that I can charge more money for, I don't have to fuck people over. And just like the idea that no one had thought of that was so fascinating to me, because what's fascinating is like fashion is expensive. Like clothes are like the Gap pays not very much for its labor, but it uses it's so inefficient everywhere else that it still has to suppress labor. So yeah, the incentive to try to squeeze more money from the human beings making your shit is responsible for all this evil, instead of just deciding to be more creative or make a product that's worth more money where you could have good margins.
Well, it's like, somebody explain to me why the shareholders of Walmart don't have to pay back the United States government for all of the money, for all of the,
their employees are on food stamps.
Yeah. So like, as a taxpayer,
yeah,
I want to be made whole before before a shareholder gets a penny.
Yeah.
And you talk about cognitive dissonance. Nobody is weaker than the people at the bottom of a commodity chain.
Yeah.
And because of their localized power, no one is less self-aware about their weakness.
Yeah.
So one of the crazy things about this is, one, when you just realize that everybody talks about, the South had great generals. Not really.
Yeah.
Like the South had a bunch of 3-star generals who wanted the fancy uniforms.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the sort of major colonel class who were just about logistics. The Confederate Army, the South wouldn't let Jefferson Davis nationalize the railroads. And they were so fighting about their own shit that they wouldn't let the president. So the Confederate Army couldn't get 8 pounds of hay a day to its horses. Yeah. The very first thing Lincoln did was nationalize the railroads, and all those West Point number crunchers. I mean, they had those trains rolling up. Yeah. So so there was a whole cosplay. There was a reenactment cosplay thing happening in real time.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that they started this war, and then like arrogant idiots, they decided, we're going to show Europe, we're going to withhold our cotton crop. Yeah. And the thing they didn't realize is I know this, and like the most important thing in the price of cotton is what's called the carryover. Yeah. How many bales from the year before that, how many bales are still in the system that have not been turned into clothes? Yeah. And the 1860 and 1861 carryover was so great that the world textile industry didn't really need any cotton for 2 years. Yeah. And that war, what's so infuriating about all these statues and all these people who talk about, like,
no, they led the people down the garden path.
They killed these people.
Yeah.
You know what it was? These were all like Lindsey Grahams. They were politicians who just liked to say crazy shit and never actually had to do anything. And then they're the dog that caught the car.
Yeah.
And they were just totally. They didn't want to. They just wanted to give crazy speeches and be populist assholes. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, they talked so much shit that they actually had to go do it.
Well, they realized that the people a couple levels below them actually believed what they were saying. And then
they began to believe. It started out, I mean, it's the cycle. It's cynical politicians saying stuff they know isn't true. Yeah. And then it's believed by huge swaths of the population. And from those swaths, new politicians arise to replace these guys. So as opposed to cynical people, you now have true believers, and that's the.
Well, and then events start to happen, and the cynical ones realize, okay, we can't actually go off this ledge, so let me go try to negotiate with my people, and they can't.
You can't.
And they realize, oh, they really believe it, and they are not based in reality, and they're not aware of what they're about to do.
So the South started a war
that objectively they could never win. But their military strategy was
There was no.
invade the South.
It was just like
insane.
Yeah.